And I started to say no, and I was looking around for Gregory Peck, and my wife nudged me and said, "Go ahead, you can do it for him." And I was, boom.
There are men who walk through life leaving barely a trace, and there are men who leave craters. Clint Eastwood is the latter kind. At 95 years old, he remains one of the most recognizable faces in American cinema. A man who turned squinting into an art form, who made silence feel louder than any gunshot, and who built a legacy in Hollywood that younger generations are still trying to make sense of. But for all his stoic performances on screen, the truth is that Clint Eastwood's private life was never stoic at all. It was messy, complicated, passionate, and at times deeply painful. He loved many women. He hurt more than a few. And yet there are 6 in particular, 6 women whose imprints on his heart proved impossible to erase. These are not just footnotes in a biography. These are the women who shaped who Clint Eastwood actually was, away from the cameras and the acclaim. Let us walk through each of them, and understand what made these relationships so impossible to leave behind. Every story has a beginning, and for Clint Eastwood, the beginning was Maggie Johnson. It was 1953, and the world was still exhaling after years of war. Clint was freshly discharged from the military, young and directionless, carrying more charm than plans. Maggie was a student at UC Berkeley, a sorority girl with a steady intelligence and a life mapped out around her. When a mutual friend arranged for the two of them to meet in San Francisco, nobody expected anything serious to come of it. Maggie already had a boyfriend. Clint had no intention of settling down. But when Maggie came down the stairs of her sorority house and saw Clint for the first time, she later recalled thinking one simple word: wow. That was it. That was all it took. They began spending time together, and within months, something that should have been a casual introduction had transformed into a courtship neither of them had planned. They married in December 1953, just as Christmas lights were strung up across the neighborhoods they wandered through together. The marriage was not easy from the start. Clint himself admitted in later years that commitment chafed against him like an ill-fitting coat. He craved freedom even inside of love, and he struggled to reconcile those two competing desires. The early years were rocky in ways that only two young people trying to build something before they truly know themselves can understand. There were arguments. There were long silences. There were rumors, which eventually became confirmed truths, that Clint was seeing other women. One of those other women was a stunt woman named Roxanne Tunis, with whom he conducted a secret relationship for over a decade while still married to Maggie. In 1964, Roxanne gave birth to a daughter, Kimber, Clint's daughter, while he remained legally wed to Maggie. Whether Maggie knew, or chose not to know, has never been fully settled. What is clear is that she endured. She raised their son Kyle, born in 1968, and their daughter Allison, born in 1972. She transformed a house in Carmel by the sea into something resembling a family home, while the man she had married spent increasing amounts of time becoming a legend somewhere else. By the late 1970s, the marriage was cracking under the weight of too many secrets and too much distance. When they separated in 1979 and divorced in 1984, the settlement was reported to be somewhere in the region of $25 million, a staggering sum, and a measure of just how much Maggie had built alongside this man who was never fully present. Yet even after the legal ties dissolved, Maggie never spoke bitterly of him in public. She kept their children close, kept herself dignified, and kept the door open just enough for Clint to remain a father. Her quiet endurance was perhaps the most powerful statement she ever made. Maggie was the foundation on which Clint's entire story rested, even if he spent most of their marriage trying to escape it. If Maggie was the official chapter of Clint's early life, Roxanne Tunis was the story happening in the margins. They met on the set of the television series Rawhide in 1959. Roxanne was working as a stuntwoman and extra, a woman with her own career and her own nerve. Clint was already married. Roxanne was too. None of that stopped what unfolded between them. For nearly 14 years, Roxanne remained a quiet and steady presence in Clint's life. Their connection was real enough to produce a child, Kimber, born in June 1964. The secrecy surrounding Kimber's birth was total. Clint reportedly did not even learn of it until a year after it happened. He later described the revelation as something that hit him like a force he wasn't prepared for. He made arrangements to be part of his daughter's upbringing, but by many accounts, his presence in her early life was irregular. He saw her every few months. Roxanne raised her largely on her own. What is remarkable about Roxanne Tunis is how entirely she avoided the spotlight. She never sought to leverage her relationship with one of Hollywood's biggest stars. She never gave interviews designed to embarrass him, never sold her story to tabloids, never positioned herself as a victim. She simply lived. In time, she moved to Denver, Colorado, and built a quieter existence centered around meditation and teaching, a life so far removed from Hollywood that it seemed almost like a deliberate act of recovery from it. Roxanne passed away in June 2023 after a brief illness. Her daughter Kimber shared that Clint had been devastated by the loss. After all the secrecy and distance, after all the years and the complicated geography of their connection, something enduring had remained between them. It was not a romance preserved in amber. It was something quieter and perhaps more honest, a bond formed in youth and never entirely let go, carried forward by the child they shared and by whatever private understanding existed between two people who had once meant a great deal to each other. Kimber, for her part, has built her own career in Hollywood as a makeup artist, actress, and producer. She carries both her mother's discretion and her father's determination, and she has done so largely on her own terms. If Maggie Johnson was Clint's foundation and Roxanne Tunis his long-kept secret, then Sandra Locke was his storm. No relationship in Eastwood's life generated more turbulence, more legal drama, or more lingering controversy than this one, and arguably none has stayed with him longer. They met in 1972 through mutual social connections. Sandra was an actress with genuine talent. She had earned an Academy Award nomination earlier in her career, and she was, at the time, legally married to her childhood best friend, Gordon Anderson, in what both understood to be a platonic arrangement. She came into Clint's orbit when she auditioned for his film Breezy, was turned down for being too old for the role, and yet somehow remained in his mind anyway. A few years later, in 1975, he cast her in The Outlaw Josie Wales, and by that point whatever had been quietly growing between them was in full bloom. What followed was one of the most intertwined professional and romantic partnerships in modern Hollywood. Sandra co-starred with Clint in 6 films over the course of their relationship. She relocated with him across different homes. She poured herself into what she believed was a genuine partnership, a life built together. Clint reportedly told her things he had apparently never said to anyone, that he had never been truly faithful before because he had never truly been in love, and that she had changed that. She believed him. She took a pay cut on Josie Wales just to be near him. That is the kind of belief that reshapes a person's entire trajectory. The years they spent together were not without real warmth and creative energy. But beneath the surface, control and discouragement formed a quiet undertow. Sandra dreamed of directing, of having her own voice in the industry rather than existing in Clint's considerable shadow. She later claimed that he subtly undermined those ambitions, expressing unease at her independence, making it difficult for her to work with other collaborators. She directed 2 films, Rat Boy in 1986 and Impulse in 1990, but described the experience as one of constant friction rather than genuine support. The most painful accusations she eventually made public centered on her claim that Clint had pressured her to terminate multiple pregnancies and undergo a procedure to prevent future ones, citing his stated reluctance to have more children. Clint denied coercing her and maintained that those decisions had been hers to make. The disagreement over what really happened was never resolved in any satisfying way, only disputed, then buried under legal language. The ending, when it came, was brutal in its abruptness. In April 1989, while Sandra was away working on Impulse, she returned home to find the locks on the doors had been changed and her belongings placed in storage. A letter from Clint's attorneys arrived, addressed to her using her legal married name, a pointed reminder that in the eyes of the law, and apparently in Clint's strategy, she had no claim to the home she had helped make. She fainted when she realized what had happened. She had been locked out of a life she had believed was hers. The legal battle that followed was long and corrosive. She filed a palimony lawsuit in 1989. The case settled in 1990 with an arrangement that included a home, cash, a monthly support payment, and a development deal with Warner Brothers ostensibly worth over $1 million. But Sondra later alleged that the development deal was designed from the start to fail, that every project she brought forward was rejected by prior arrangement, rendering the deal an elaborate illusion dressed up as opportunity. She sued again in 1995. They settled again in 1996. The details remained sealed. In between those legal battles, Sondra faced breast cancer, enduring a double mastectomy and chemotherapy. She wrote in her memoir that the stress of her relationship with Clint had devastated her health, and she revealed that during her illness, he never reached out. That silence, she said, hurt more than anything the lawyers had ever done to her. Sondra Locke died in November 2018 from cardiac arrest related to breast and bone cancer. She was 74 years old. She left her estate, valued at around $20 million, to Gordon Anderson, the man who had been her steadfast companion throughout her life, the one person who had never let her down. In the end, she chose loyalty over love, or perhaps she chose the only love she had ever truly been able to count on. Sometime in the mid-1980s, while Clint was still entangled in his complicated relationship with Sondra Locke, he met a woman named Jacelyn Reeves. She was a flight attendant, and they reportedly crossed paths at a restaurant in Carmel by the Sea that Clint owned. The exact timing of their first meeting has been placed anywhere between 1984 and 1986 by different accounts, which itself suggests how carefully this chapter of his life was kept out of the public record. Jacelyn Reeves never sought the spotlight. She gave virtually no interviews about Clint, declined to make her private life a public performance, and raised her children with a quietness that stood in sharp contrast to the noise surrounding most things associated with Eastwood. From their relationship came two of Clint's most recognized children. Scott Eastwood was born in March 1986, and his sister Catherine followed in February 1988. Scott has grown up to have a genuine career in Hollywood, action films, independent projects, and a refusal to simply trade on his father's name. He has spoken in interviews about wanting to earn his place rather than inherit it, about working odd jobs around film sets before anyone took him seriously as an actor. Catherine has similarly pursued a path in the arts, balancing acting and writing while navigating the particular weight that comes with being the daughter of one of the most famous men in American film. Jacelyn Reeves represents a kind of Eastwood relationship that left almost no dramatic trace, no lawsuits, no public recriminations, no tell-all accounts. What it left instead were two people who carry Clint Eastwood's name into the future, shaped by a mother who clearly valued their privacy over any attention her own story might have generated. Frances Fisher arrived in Clint's life in 1988, on the set of Pink Cadillac, a film he was directing. They did not fall for each other immediately. The real spark, she later recalled, ignited at a pre-production party when she arrived on roller skates, caught his eye, and felt something she could only describe as recognition. As if the person she had been looking for had been standing in the room all along. Their relationship grew serious. By the early 1990s they were a public couple, walking red carpets together and presenting to the world a picture of something stable. Frances was clear-eyed about what she needed. Faithfulness was not negotiable for her, and she believed she had found that in Clint. In August 1993, their daughter Francesca was born. For a period, something that looked genuinely like domestic contentment settled over them. But it did not hold. Before the year was out, Frances discovered that Clint still had a continuing involvement with Jacelyn Reeves, the mother of his other two children. Then photographs surfaced of him with yet another woman. The betrayals were concrete and undeniable. Frances moved into the guest house. The distance between them became permanent. By spring of 1995, the relationship was finished. Looking back, Frances has spoken with a kind of philosophical honesty about what happened. She acknowledged that relationships often begin with attraction and excitement, but that survival depends on something deeper, a compatibility of values, a willingness to choose each other when things are difficult rather than just when they are easy. That deeper thing, in the end, was not there. Despite the heartbreak, she and Clint co-parented Francesca without visible bitterness. Frances continued her own respected career, and Francesca stepped into acting and has worked hard to establish herself on her own terms in the same industry her parents both inhabited. The story of Dina Ruiz begins where so many unexpected love stories do. At work, with nothing romantic intended. Dina was a news anchor for a television station in the Carmel area, and in 1992 she was assigned to interview Clint Eastwood for a segment. She walked in as a journalist. She walked out having made an impression neither of them could entirely explain. Dina later said she found Clint unexpectedly grounded during that interview, not what she had anticipated from a Hollywood legend. Clint admitted they got along well, that there had been a lightness to the conversation, even a little harmless flirting. One of Dina's colleagues joked, apparently, that she was going to end up marrying him someday. It was the kind of offhand remark that people forget immediately, right up until it turns out to be true. A subsequent encounter at a social event in Spanish Bay sealed something between them. They ended up seated next to each other. They held hands. Clint described the whole thing with bemused affection, as though he could not quite believe he was the sort of person to whom this kept happening. By early 1995, they were a confirmed couple, photographed together at a golf tournament. By September of that year, he had proposed. 3 months after that, they traveled to Haley, Idaho for a marriage license, and in March 1996 they were married in a ceremony that Clint arranged in 48 hours while Dina was away on a trip with friends, orchestrated at the estate of a close friend, a surprise she later described as her dream wedding. Their daughter Morgan was born in December 1996, and for years, Clint and Dina appeared to represent something genuinely stable. She spoke warmly of him in interviews, praised his humility, described him as the least pretentious person she had ever known. She gave him an affectionate nickname, Saint Francis of Assisi, that captured something gentle and unexpectedly humble about the man beneath the legend. They rarely spent more than 10 days apart. The fractures, when they came, were partly of their own making. In 2012, Dina launched a reality television series called Mrs. Eastwood and Company, focusing on her life with Morgan and stepdaughter Francesca. Clint was furious. He felt it violated the privacy he had always guarded fiercely, that it turned their home into a performance. His anger was real, and the distance it created between them was real too. By summer of that year, though they still shared a roof, they no longer shared a bedroom. Dina, struggling with the collapse of her marriage, found comfort in a friendship with a man named Scott Fisher, a basketball coach recently returned from Australia following his own divorce. She maintained the relationship was strictly platonic. But Scott's ex-wife reached out to Clint directly, and in a twist that reads more like fiction than fact, Clint and that woman began dating. Dina filed for legal separation in September 2013, and formally for divorce a month later. What is striking about Dina, in the aftermath, is her refusal to perform bitterness. She spoke publicly and graciously about Clint, defending his character, insisting that the people around him had caused more damage than he himself had. She called him a good man, the sweetest, most loving, low-key person, even as she was ending her marriage to him. In July 2016, she married Scott Fisher in Santa Barbara and moved forward with the same warmth she had always led with. By the time Christina Sandera entered Clint Eastwood's life, he had already accumulated enough love stories to fill a library. The setting was the Mission Ranch Hotel in Carmel, a property Clint had purchased back in 1986 and spent years restoring into something beautiful. Christina worked there as a hostess. He owned the place, though he was the first to admit he was not the glad-handing, backslapping kind of owner who enjoys making the rounds. He was too private for that. And yet something happened. Something quiet and unhurried, the kind of connection that does not announce itself with drama or complication. Christina Sandera was not a public figure, had no particular desire to become one, and came to Clint without any of the Hollywood adjacency that had characterized most of his previous relationships. She was simply herself, warm, grounded, and apparently exactly what a man in his mid-80s, tired of storms, was finally ready for. They became companions in the truest sense of the word. Christina appeared at public events with Clint, she was at his side at the Academy Awards, photographed walking with him in Carmel, but she never sought to make herself a story. She did not give interviews about what it was like to be with him. She was simply there. Tragically, Christina Sandera died in January 2024. She was 61 years old. Those who knew them both said the loss hit Clint with a particular weight, the weight of a man who had lived long enough to understand that what they had was rare. Not passionate in the way of his younger years, not complicated by the entanglements of careers and ambitions and competing desires, but steady, real. The kind of thing you can only fully appreciate when you have had everything else and finally discovered what was missing. When you lay these 6 relationships side by side, a portrait emerges that is more complicated and more human than anything Clint Eastwood ever put on screen. He was capable of deep feeling and profound selfishness, sometimes simultaneously. He sought freedom and also craved connection. He built families and then struggled to show up for them. He loved women who deserved better, and sometimes, perhaps, he received love he had not fully earned. What stays with you, thinking about all of them together, is not Clint at the center. It is the women themselves. Maggie's silent endurance. Roxanne's absolute discretion. Sandra's fierce reckoning with betrayal. Jaislyn's quiet dignity. Frances's clear-eyed honesty. Dina's extraordinary grace in the wreckage of a marriage. Christina's uncomplicated presence at the end of a very long journey. At 95, Clint Eastwood has outlived some of them and outlasted all of the relationships. Whether he has truly made peace with what those years contained is something only he knows. But the fact that these 6 women remain part of the conversation about who he is, not just professionally, but as a human being, suggests that whatever he felt for each of them was real enough to leave a mark that time has not fully faded. 6 women. 6 different versions of love. And one man still carrying all of it.